get started with our first case in just a moment. Before we do, a brief rundown of how we'll handle each case. We'll have staff present cases one by one to us. We'll have an opportunity to ask them questions before we invite the applicant up or a representative of the applicant. And they'll have a chance to share any additional details with us that they might have and have us ask them questions. We'll then open up a public hearing for each case individually, and I'll let you know when that is. We do ask that you keep comments to 3 minutes or less. State your name for the record. And then after the public hearing, applicants will be invited back up to address anything raised during the public hearing. We'll have a discussion, make a decision, and move on to our next case. Before we get started with 2550 Eastern Ave, just open it up to commissioners. Are there any conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest for today?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just identify applicant for 1050 Fuller Avenue Northeast is a member of the board of directors of the organization I used to be employed by. I am no longer employed there, and so I do not feel that there's a conflict of interest, but I just wanted to call that out.
All right, any discussion on that? No financial interests or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Make a motion that Commissioner Wheeler does not have a conflict of interest.
Support.
All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, any other potential conflicts? Okay, then let's get started with our first case, 2550 Eastern Ave Southeast. And Elizabeth will walk us through this.
The proposed project at 2550 Eastern Avenue Southeast includes the redevelopment of a vacant former school building and subsequently a church into a 27-unit condominium development. 14 units are anticipated to be priced affordably and sold to low-income households, with 13 units priced at the market rate. The case is before you today because multiple family residential developments are subject to special land use approval in the mid-century neighborhood low-density residential zone district. So a special land use is a use that may be allowed if it meets certain standards. And so that is what the Planning Commission will be looking at today. The subject property is located at the corner of Eastern and Mayhewwood. And as you can see on this slide, there's an existing former school building there. And, pardon me, it's in the mid-century neighborhood low-density residential zone district. The traditional business area is located at the intersection of Eastern and Alger, slightly to the north. So relative to the master plan, the property is not included in any area-specific plan. The Southtown Business Area Specific Plan doesn't include this property. So we'll really be looking at the 2002 master plan for some guidance there. The 2002 master plan designates the area in which the property is located as institutional, and I think that reflects the previous school use on the site. The surrounding property is medium density residential, which is 5 to 9.9 dwelling units per acre. There are a couple other relevant sections of the master plan that I'd like to mention. Chapter 10, Development Guidelines, includes a number of elements that the Planning Commission should use when making decisions for these kinds of projects. There's also a section on multiple family development that includes the same kind of recommendations. These include connectivity, putting them on the right kinds of streets, like a major street. We want to ensure that the density is appropriate and that the scale of any kind of new building is appropriate with the neighborhood. We want to make sure the building is placed appropriately and oriented appropriately, as well as parking. We want to make sure that parking is appropriately located, there's adequate parking, and in terms of multiple family, that maybe there's transit available. It should also have appropriate landscape buffering from other uses nearby. So I just wanted to mention a couple of those things. I'd also like to mention the Great Neighborhood section of the zoning ordinance which recommends a mix of dwelling units within a neighborhood to provide a range of housing choices for people that want to live in that neighborhood. So the site is about 90,000 square feet, or just over 2,000, I'm sorry, not 2,000 acres, 2 acres in area. It is improved with a U-shaped building that was built as a school. It's single story, and it's almost 50,000 square feet. It's brick and concrete. There's an existing drop-off in the front, and in the rear, there's, blacktop, pardon me, and there are currently curb cuts to Nevada and, actually, I think just to Nevada there. I would like to mention, you can see here, it says vacated Nevada Street. So at one time, Nevada did go all the way through to Eastern. The city vacated that street, meaning the city no longer owns it. It was separated between the two adjacent private property owners, and I think in this case it went to school to the north and the south. So the vacated Nevada Street, there are utilities, city utilities under there. There's an easement for a sidewalk, but it is all privately owned. So I just want to mention that because we wouldn't be able to open Nevada up all the way to Eastern because it's all privately owned. Relative to the project before you, it's proposed that the school building, then church building, would be redeveloped into 27 dwelling units. 8 of those dwelling units would be in an addition. The applicant is also proposing to convert the building into 2 stories. All units would have at least 3 bedrooms. There would be 23 units with 3 bedrooms, and possibly 4 units would have 4 bedrooms. All units would have porches or patios, and the units along Mayhew would have porches. There'll be community spaces and like the courtyard and a gazebo, and the parking lot would have 37 spaces. I want to talk a little bit about density. So the maximum allowed density for a multiple family development in this zone district is 17.4 dwelling units per acre. The proposed development has 13 dwelling units per acre. So it's within the allowable density if you find this to be an appropriate use there. I'd like to talk a little bit about the proposed setbacks. So, as you can see, Mayhew Wood isn't, straight. It curves a little bit, and the existing U-shaped building is not consistent along Mayhew Wood. So they are proposing to site the I just want to mention that I'm not really looking at the existing building. I'm really only looking at the addition here. So the addition is about 38 feet from back of curb, and that's how we do front setbacks. The median building, the median setback of the houses across the street and then on the same block to the east is about 38 feet. So that's pretty consistent with the established setback on the block. Relative to the side setback, the building will be about 37 feet 8 inches at its closest point and 42 feet at the widest. And of course, they are proposing to have a drive there with the requisite landscape buffering that would have to meet the landscape buffer requirements. So one of the elements that the Planning Commission should consider strongly is that relationship between the proposed building and the residential to the east. So we're talking about the height of the building, the setback, and is that transition appropriate? And the same thing with that front setback. We want to make sure that the height, relative to the height of the building, that it's, and the scale and massing, that it's appropriate for the neighborhood. Relative to green site elements, it looks like the site substantially will meet that, which would be confirmed at permitting if this project is approved. It's slightly under the green space requirement, and that would need to be modified. On to parking. Actually, one other thing I'd like to mention about the site layout. As you can see on this plan, there are two openings onto Nevada. There's the main entrance from Mayhew Wood, and there are these two curb cuts on Nevada. It is staff's opinion that we really don't want to see cut-through traffic from this development or the neighborhood in this case. So we really don't want those curb cuts to be part of this project. We explored with the fire department, and it's been agreed that we'd be able to close those curb cuts to public access. We likely could close one of them, and then the other one would have to have some kind of emergency access for fire access. I don't know all the details, but I know that there's certain issues that the fire truck needs to be able to access the furthest part of the building. So when, if the project is approved, all those details would be reviewed by staff and the applicant to ensure it meets zoning as well as fire codes. So if you're amenable to approving this, we really just want to see one access there, and the other one have some kind of gate or something that could be opened by the fire department should there be an emergency. One thing that I did mention that in my staff report, but one thing I didn't mention was that likely if we did close those entrances, we would lose a few parking spaces because due to traffic circulation, because we'd need people to be able to, drive around the parking lot. So that leads me to the minimum parking requirement. So for a multiple family development, you need 1.5 spaces per unit. For this unit mix, 48 parking spaces would be required. Now, the zoning ordinance does allow a reduction for affordable housing projects. As I understand it, this project could allow a range of incomes meeting the affordable moniker. However, it's not strictly for extremely low income. It's also for, more moderate, for folks with a more moderate income. So based on our parking reductions, this would not technically meet our requirements, but I understand that they anticipate that the applicant anticipates most of their tenants not to own vehicles. I'll defer to the applicant to talk more about that if you have questions. But in sum, it does not technically meet our parking reduction for affordable housing, but the Planning Commission may wish to take that into consideration. So 38 parking spaces are 37 parking spaces are proposed, 48 are required. The parking is deficient by 11 spaces. The Planning Commission can grant waivers based on the existence of transit, which we have on Eastern, as well as on-street parking. We might also, I don't think this is a part of the project, but a bike room could be added, and that could also be counted toward a parking reduction. Relative to the floor plan, all of these, like I said before, have 3 bedrooms. There'll be 2 stories. So there'll be a main bedroom on the ground floor, 2 additional bedrooms, sometimes 3 on the upper floor. Actually, I don't know where, in a 4-bedroom unit, I don't know what the arrangement would be, but at least 1 bedroom on the ground floor. As you can see here, the facade looks slightly different from what it does now. The existing building is about 20 feet from the grade to the ridge, to the highest point. And the renovated building would be approximately 24 feet to the highest point. And so it would be about 4 feet taller than what we have there now. In general, the project would meet the requirements for transparency in materials and facade variation, as well as building orientation. There'll be entrances facing the street, and the main entrance facing Eastern will remain there. One of the recommendations of the master plan for reuse of former school buildings is to sort of keep a lot of those elements of the school. Now, that really is aimed toward those, the traditional neighborhood districts, but the Planning Commission could draw on some of those recommendations as well. So we have received a number of letters from residents. There are several letters in support of the project, and there are a number of letters expressing opposition and concern about the project. Those concerns include traffic, noise, lack of adequate parking, access to Nevada Street, which I've mentioned already, and the location of the trash enclosure. That the adjacent property owner to the east had some concerns about that. It could be possible to move it, but it's likely the applicant placed it there because they thought it was the best for the development. In sum, we're looking at a multiple family reuse of a former school building, 27 dwelling units. They're intended to be condominium units. And so the issues I think that the Planning Commission should keep in mind when considering this project are the appropriateness of the use, the appropriateness of the density, the site layout and setbacks, the building massing and scale, and how that works with the pattern of development in the neighborhood, and as well as transitions to and from adjacent uses. Additionally, we'll want to keep in mind proximity of transit and adequacy of parking. Do you have any questions for me?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Commissioners, any questions at this time? All right, thank you. I'll invite the applicant up if there's other stuff you want to share with us.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dakota Reel, and I'm the Real Estate Development Manager at ICCF Community Homes. Just here to kind of summarize what Elizabeth already presented. ICCF purchased the parcel in early 2020. After much deliberation with the previous owner, which is Tabernacle Church, and after surveying the market needs of both Alger Heights and the surrounding neighborhoods, ICCF purchased this building with the full intent to bring affordable homes onto the site. The parcel sits on the edge, right on the dividing line of a commercial corridor and low-density residential neighborhood. From our vantage point, this setting is ideal for new ooh. There you go. Something's happening.
Oh, no, I was
Oh.
show.
No worries. From our vantage point, this setting is ideal for new housing because of the amenities and services available along Eastern Avenue in the Alger Heights Business District. Our plan is to reactivate this building that has sat vacant and blighted for decades, and to do so in a way that is complementary to the existing neighborhood context. ICCF proposes redeveloping the standing building into a 27-unit development we are calling the Seymour Condominiums. ICCF will completely renovate the existing structure and construct an addition on the southeast side of the building to add 8 of these homes. Each home has direct access to the outside of the building onto both their private patio spaces and a shared green space. This communal green space was a key element of our community-focused design planning. Residents will also benefit from an indoor shared community space and a mailroom. The current proposed plan includes 37 parking spaces behind the building. There is also an existing driveway off Eastern Avenue we intend to keep in place for all deliveries, pickups, and drop-offs. Repurposing this drive lane will positively impact the traffic flow around the building. Based on neighborhood feedback, we are proposing access to the residential parking from both Nevada and Mayhewwood. The building development and individual homes are being designed to maximize energy efficiency and green infrastructure. Homes are planned to be completely electric, and ICCF continues to explore green energy solutions that could benefit residents in the long term. ICCF wants to acknowledge that this site does contain asbestos and lead, and we are working with environmental specialists because we will be fully remediating the site during construction. Each home in the building is approximately 1,400 square feet and will be 3 to 4 bedrooms with 2 full bathrooms. This is roughly the same size and makeup of the surrounding homes in the neighborhood. Each home will include a full bathroom and bedroom on the first floor to make these homes more viable for our aging neighbors and persons with disabilities. Our intention is to design all homes and community spaces in and outside of the building to be visitable, with options to make the first floor of all homes completely accessible. ICCF intends to sell 14 of these homes, or approximately half of them, affordably to low-income households. Just for the sake of clarity, ICCF defines low-income households for this project as those with an annual gross income which is at or below 90% of the Kent County area median income. The remaining units are intended to be sold at market rate. ICCF intends to place our affordable homes, or these affordable homes, into its Community Homes Land Trust, or CHLT. The CHLT exists to provide affordable homeownership opportunities to income-qualified families while ensuring the long-term affordability of these homes. The benefit of the CHLT is that it ensures that the home prices on our affordable homes will remain attainable for future generations of owners. We know that this SLU request in front of you pertains only to the multi-family housing as an allowable use, not market rate versus affordable or homeownership versus rental. However, we do want it to be heard that this project is planned to be truly economically diverse condo development, where the housing needs of a variety of persons and households can be represented. ICCF has been successfully creating affordable homeownership initiatives in Grand Rapids for nearly 50 years, and we feel that this development will be no exception. We understand that some neighbors are concerned about traffic increases on residential streets as a result of this development. ICCF worked with our architects and the city to brainstorm many viable alternatives for accessing parking on the site, which included access off Eastern. This solution was ultimately deemed impossible due to the space needed for a drive-through versus the location of the existing building, the amount of traffic it could create on Nevada, the expense of reopening Nevada, etc. We originally only had access from Nevada into the parking, but after meeting with neighbors, added an alternative drive off Mayhewwood to create a better stream of traffic. We have added increased barriers between our properties and the neighbors so they are not significantly impacted. We were also able to add an additional parking spot with this alternative plan. The two access points off of Nevada would allow us to keep this flow of traffic while maximizing our available spaces for all 37 spots. Without both access points on Nevada, as Elizabeth pointed out, we would have to create a different flow of traffic, which would result in less parking on the parcel. Ultimately, ICCF is committed to meeting all LED's requirements in order to make the use of this building possible. Our priority is a housing development first that is coupled with an effective and efficient parking lot to serve our residents. Based on conversations with neighbors, traffic has been a concern in this community even before our proposal. We have been working with our neighbors, Tabernacle Community Church, to address these concerns and have already helped them broker a partnership with Fifth Third Bank to use as an alternative parking spot for some of their traffic. We know this is only one issue neighbors have faced, but it is a solution for some of it. While we are asking for a parking reduction, we just wanted to acknowledge what Elizabeth talked a little bit about. Because our program says that we will serve households up to 90%, we were deemed to be disqualified for the affordable housing element or parking reduction. However, just some data. For the last 3 years, of the 13 households that we have sold to in that time, the average AMI level of those homeowners is 48% of the area median income. So if we were, rather than just our program cap, if we were applying with the average income of the households, our request for reduction would be much less. It would be only for 4 units or 4 parking spots. Any household who purchases a home at Seymour Condominiums will benefit from the nearby amenities that they can reach both on foot and with on-site access to the rapid bus line. We have had dozens of informal conversations with neighbors and other interested households who are interested in purchasing a home at this site where they can downsize, go to just one car or none, and live in an integrated community that is amenity rich and focused on connection versus isolation. We want to acknowledge that using this building for housing will be a change from its current form. It can be difficult to see change in a building that has sat unused for over 2 decades. While this change will increase the number of neighbors nearby and the total number of cars in this neighborhood, we know that this site truly can support 27 households and the cars that will come with them. The property was used as a neighborhood Christian school for many decades, hosting hundreds of children as well as dozens of staff members throughout the school year. It had buses, parent traffic throughout the year. This site was never intended to be used as low-density residential housing with just single-family homes. It is fair to assume that the Seymour condominium plan will have substantially less traffic than what the building was originally built to sustain through a school. Furthermore, an unsuccessful plan for a medical facility on the site was previously approved for a special land use, and that use would have also created substantially more traffic throughout the day. Ultimately, this building has stood as a gateway between residential single-family neighborhoods and the commercial corridor for decades. Tearing this building down to replace it with a small number of single-family homes would not reflect the original intention of this space, which was to be used by many people. We hope that the Planning Commission will see that ICCF has also worked to engage neighbors for quite some time, changing and adapting our plans based on their feedback. During our meetings, we did hear from many neighbors who were both supportive and excited about this proposal. The opposition we did receive during our meetings and in informal conversations centered around us only pushing traffic to Nevada. We worked to accommodate these concerns by adding alternative access off Mayhew Wood. Despite difficulties engaging with an active neighborhood association in Alger Heights, we were able to keep neighbors, businesses, and surrounding neighborhood associations informed of our progress. Nothing about our development plans have been quiet, under the radar, or an attempt to quickly squeeze in public approval without neighbors knowing about it. This was not fast-paced, and we genuinely heard the neighbors and their concerns, and we were highly sensitive to the building context of this neighborhood. This proposal was developed in response to our community's need for mixed-income housing options. We have hundreds of clients looking for homeownership in homeownership opportunities in neighborhoods where their families can thrive. Not only is Seymour Condominiums perfect for new families because it is located near many amenities, benefits from the rapid bus line, but this structure has also stood as a community center for years. Tearing down this building when it could still serve the larger community through redevelopment would be a lost opportunity. ICCF believes that this building and location can be reactivated and redeveloped to promote housing equity, income diversity, and economic viability for Alger Heights. Myself and my colleagues and our architect are both here to answer any of your questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, questions for the applicant?
I just have a clarifying question. Staff report mentioned conversations with you about access through Nevada. In your presentation, you mentioned that that would be open and accessible to the community. Can you clarify whether or not that's your intention?
Totally. So I think in our conversations, this is a developing program. We will, of course, defer to our planning department. We just wanted to acknowledge the fact that the reasons they were included currently was to promote traffic flow and increase the number of parking lots. Without them, we will ultimately lose space on the parcel for parking. But of course, we've been talking with Elizabeth about that a lot. We understand their concerns. We ultimately want this to be used as a multifamily residential housing use, and how that parking lot gets configured is something we are more than willing to work on with our partners at the city.
Can you speak to how many actual spaces you'll lose if you eliminate general access via Nevada?
Yeah, so we will lose a minimum of 2. So we did run that scenario with our architect yesterday, and it would be a minimum of 2 spots. We could potentially lose more, just depending on kind of the requirements for emergency vehicle access.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up to that, you have done a lot of housing development projects around the city. our code has a required parking calculation, but what, in your experience, do you find for clientele that you would expect in this area to need in terms of parking?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Many of our neighbors find the ownership of a vehicle, our owners with limited income find ownership of multiple vehicles to be a financial burden. That's part of the reason why we picked this location, is to give households the option to go carless if they want to, and make it more optional for them. In our experience, many of our families do not have a vehicle, at least in our rentals. In a lot of our home ownership opportunities, households have about one. Thanks.
Can you talk about the location of the trash receptacle? Have you looked at any alternatives?
Yeah. I was actually just sitting with my coworker or colleague, and we're willing to work on where that's located. When we previously, so our actual first preference was to locate it at the end of Nevada. We thought that would be the least disruptive. We did have some trash and garbage disposal companies that we consulted for that. They didn't prefer that location. They preferred something that was a little bit easier to access. That's why it's located where it is now. However, if we close those access points to Nevada or things like that, we are more than willing to come up with a creative solution to move that, but also still keep it kind of away from people, and also make sure we'll work with our neighbor.
Thank you.
Did you explore any alternative layouts for the addition in other areas on the site?
Yeah, we did. We went through quite a few ideations of the design, trying to fit it in the right way. The current one was done to maximize the parking space, essentially. If it was moved to the other side, just because of how the building is, it would have really limited us on the format of the parking lot that we could fit onto the site, and thus would have made less parking spots available. So it was placed there ultimately just to make sure we got as many parking spots as possible. Yeah.
Okay, other questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
This might be a question for Kim, I'm not sure, but can you confirm the height of the addition is also 24 feet? And I guess along those lines, I'm wondering, how does that relate to the buildings across the street? So one of my concerns is about the scale and the massing of that between the existing building plus the addition is quite significant. So I'm just wondering whether the height is comparable to the structures that are across the street on Mayhewwood.
I don't know the exact height of the houses across the street, but this is a good slide to look at where it's 2 stories, but we reduced the scale of that by really making it more of a European model of a 1.5-story look with dormers on it. So the height of it really is the height of the existing school brick. And then the second floor is hidden behind the dormer system, instead of making it 2 stories. I don't know the exact height, but 24 feet is not a really tall building, per se, for a 2-story building.
The addition, though, is the same size as the building.
Sorry, yes. They're the same height. And how we really reduce the scale of that is we came up with the dormer system, and then the roof flattens out on the top so that the depth mass does not express itself at the street level.
Okay. And your floor to ceilings on the second floor are what?
8. First floor is 11.
8 and 11, okay. So they're still relatively low, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think to elaborate on what Elizabeth said, based on past experience and the road network, it was our recommendation to close the connection points on Nevada with the understanding that we would lose about 2 spaces. It does appear that there's adequate room, I'm trying to pull up the site plan here, adequate room with the buffer that's off Nevada. They're currently proposed at 10 feet, which could be reduced to 5. Also, the drive lane at the south end of that parking lot is 24 feet, and typically we can get 22 feet. However, we'd need to do the fire truck turning movements as well to make sure that they could circulate that should the westernmost curb cut be closed. But it was our recommendation that both curb cuts be closed to through traffic, understanding that we, through our conversations with the fire department, that an emergency egress is going to be necessary. We've had various treatment options in the past, whether that's gates that can be either given a key to the fire department or they drive through them, I'm assuming. Mr. Doctor's there in the back, no drive-through. So there's various treatments that could be employed to help ensure that it is not used by the users of the site or cut through traffic.
Just wanting to acknowledge too the note that we're slightly under our green space requirement, and we would of course make sure to fix that and accommodate those unnecessary requirements in our LUD's permitting process. So this space also benefits from a very large green space directly next to our parcel that we share with our partners at Tabernacle Church. So even though we might be slightly under, we are so benefiting from their immense green space as well. So our residents will appreciate that.
All right, if there are no other questions at this time, I'll have you take a seat. I will open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case, please come forward, state your name, and share your thoughts with us. We'll use the timer in front of me here just to keep everyone on track.
Hi, my name is Keith Schraft, 844 Nevada Street Southeast. I have a petition to give to you people today. It is signed by 100% of the homeowners who would have traffic impaction on Mayhewwood, Kentucky, and Nevada. We want no traffic coming down Nevada. People are already upset with speeders on Kentucky, and they're just nobody's willing to give on that. Now, if there has to be a gate there that the fire department has a key to, that might be acceptable, you know, as an emergency thing. But there's houses that if there's people coming and going, the headlights are going to be shining in their living rooms coming out of this parking lot into Nevada. Nevada is a one-lane street. There's parking on both sides. On Sundays, it's when the church is in session, it's one lane way down Nevada, and Kentucky is one lane. It would even be hard to get a fire truck down there when it's packed full like it gets on for the 2-3 hours on Sunday. So, and here was something I was thinking about when they were just discussing this. If these are 3 and 4 bedroom units, how many of these people are going to have teenagers with cars? It's a thought. I mean, they're talking, you know, some of the people won't have cars. But if you got 3 and 4 bedrooms, you got multiple people living there, then you've got if it's older people, you've got their children, their grandchildren, stuff coming and going. So anyway, I know there's a lot of people that are against the thing because of the traffic and they don't figure the use of it is proper. I understand the need for affordable housing, but we had one neighbor across the street from us on Nevada that was so spooked by this project, they sold their house. Now they sold it for $477,500. $477,500. with the low income of these people that are coming in, this is going to lower the property values of everybody else in this area. And that's going to lower the tax values. That's my perception. But anyway, this is 100% of the homeowners who would be negatively impacted. And can I give it to somebody?
Yep, feel free to give it to Commissioner Shannon here in the end. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jake Lang. I'm here on behalf of Tabernacle Community Church, and just would like to speak to you in regards to the project at 2550 Eastern. As a representative of Tabernacle, I would like to voice our community's full support for this project. Having been located in the Elder Heights community neighborhood for almost 20 years now, the church has seen our need for affordable housing continue to grow. We believe the proposed project is a great opportunity for the Elder Heights neighborhood to welcome new members into its growing community. It was this vision of flourishing that led us to partner with ICCF so that we would see this building not collapse and fall into ruin and become a blight to the neighborhood, but become a thriving community where families and individuals can flourish. The proposed plans will beautify the corner and restore vitality and life that Elder Heights is known for. We love the commitment to reuse a historically significant building in a manner that is similar to what it was originally intended for, versus seeing this building torn down or becoming a vacant property. This project will provide necessary and needed home ownership opportunities for neighbors from a diversity of income levels. As many of you are well aware of, the housing needs assessment from 2020 showed that we needed to produce 5,340 rental units and 3,458 for sale units by 2025. Our community needs more housing, especially housing that is made available to households with limited or restricted income, and this project will provide that. And third, ICCF has a rich history of providing beautiful, dignified housing for low-income neighbors. We're confident that this is a project that will make the neighborhood better and not worse. Right? ICCF has a history of nearly 50 years of providing beautiful housing, renovated housing that honors the surrounding neighborhoods while serving their missional purpose. My staff have been working with neighbors to adapt plans and have shown that they are flexible and willing to cooperate. And we believe that this project will be a great benefit to the community around us. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Sam Callan, and I live in Garfield Park, about a quarter mile from this proposed development. I sit on the board of the Garfield Park Neighborhood Association, and I work as an advocate for creating vibrant housing that supports local, bottom-up economic growth. I'm here today to urge you to vote in support of this development. This is a perfect example of infill development. ICCF has successfully refurbished multiple schools into needed housing within the scope of how our nation, state, county, and city all define affordable housing. While not everyone in our community has the wages or wealth needed to afford this housing, there are many who struggle to find housing at this price point who will be served. And who are these people who struggle to find this type of housing? One comment that I saw in the packet and that I heard today was that mixed income housing or lower income people are not welcome in this community, in my community. What this comment fails to comprehend is that this development could be completely filled by people who already live within walking distance of this development. There is that much demand. Examples include elders who have lived in Elder Heights their whole lives and wish to stay but can't maintain a house anymore. Children who grew up here and want to live here but need to move out from mom and dad's house and can't afford $400,000 to buy a house next to the one their parents own. And renters who rent a bedroom or two in our community but wish they had their own place. Furthermore, downtown Alger Heights has been uniquely resilient, seeing much lower turnover of businesses than other commercial blocks in our city. Over the past 4 years, I have seen an increase in foot traffic to the streets with 2 ice cream windows opening up, Saturday markets, and library events. Adding housing right on Eastern will increase foot traffic and support our local businesses, growing wealth for our community. Parking considerations are real, but require an area-wide solution, not the blocking of required housing. Within walking distance of this proposed development, there are over 4 acres of parking lots. And as I walk around my community, I'm constantly seeing how empty they are. As someone who spends a lot of time in our neighborhood, I assure you that we have enough parking already. Parking may be an issue worth fixing for the people living on the block, I agree, but not at the expense of creating more housing for our community. I urge you to vote in support of this development. Thank you.
My name is Kimberly Heisel. I live at 2439 Blaine Avenue. I live at the end of Blaine that is closest to Alger, and I've been listening to all the conversation about the traffic on Eastern and the traffic on Nevada, and I certainly agree with those who live on Nevada because that is one narrow street. My mother lives on Mayhewwood, so that's another reason I'm concerned. And I know somebody who lives on Kentucky, and I can see what that's going to do to the traffic, but nobody has addressed what's going to happen to the traffic of all of those people that are coming down 28th Street and take Kalamazoo to get over to this housing develop. And what everybody does is they turn down one of the side streets, and frequently it's mine. My neighbor is concerned. She has a plastic child sign out, that those ones that says go slow. She was wondering about those roundabout things that they put up to slow traffic. I suggested speed bumps, but she said no, they have to be paid for by the property owners. And I just think that should also be taken into consideration too. It isn't just going to impact those streets over there and Eastern in that, it's also going to impact the traffic on Kalamazoo, the traffic on Alger. Alger's only a 2-lane street with a bike route. Like I said, I am opposed. I'm concerned about what it's going to do to noise in the neighborhood. It's a fairly quiet neighborhood. That's why I live there. That's why I've stayed there. I guess that's about it. I am concerned about Eastern. The traffic on Eastern can get really bad. I've watched people use the left-hand turn on Eastern as a way to pass a whole entire line of traffic because it pretty much bottlenecks on Eastern at the high traffic times. So I have to agree with the gentleman on Nevada. I'm opposed. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lene Satterley. I live at 847 Nevada, directly across from Keith, down towards the end of the cul-de-sac. And while I understand the need for increased affordable housing, I am opposed to this plan as it stands without renovations. I have lived in that home for 35 years, raised 4 children there. I was there when Seymour Christian was operational, and yes, there was school traffic, but that was a couple times a day. It was not 24 hours a day. There were not cars parking there around the clock. There were not overnight lights. There was not noise pollution. It was a limited amount of time. Our older daughters went to Seymour Christian. It was a great setup, but it was not detrimental to the neighborhood except for short periods of time. This is highly concerning to me. Most of us have a 1.5 or a 1-stall garage and a single-lane driveway, and many of us have 2 cars. So my husband parks in front of our house in front of the driveway every night, and I park in the driveway because that's what most of us do so we can get our cars in and out. Nevada is very narrow, and people do park on both sides, and the thought of having 24-hour-a-day traffic on our street, on Kentucky, on Mayhewwood is extremely concerning to me. I think people are grossly underestimating the amount of cars that people who live here are going to have. I understand that some will have 0 or 1 cars, but I feel like the majority of people still in our city, even with access to public transportation and bikes, still have 2 vehicles. Where are they going to park those? They want convenience. They will drive around and park our spots on Nevada to just pop into their unit over there or park along Mayhew Wood. They're not going to care about parking further away to be respectful of the neighbors. They're going to fill in those spots. As it is, like Keith said, on Sunday mornings, you can barely get 1 car through. That's fine. I'm okay with it. It's 1 morning a week for a couple of hours. It doesn't negatively impact my entire life. But having the lights, the constant in and out moving of people 24 hours a day in homes is going to be incredibly disruptive, and I'm wondering what's going to be done to address the parking and the traffic around there. Even if there's not access on Nevada, I guarantee that people who live there will still drive around and down there because that will be the most convenient parking to fill up those open spots along that street, thereby blocking traffic flow down there. My suggestion is, why can't we put this with the existing building, but do away with that 2-story addition? I think 27 units is far too many people for that section. Remodel the existing building with the 19 units that you can get in there and use the rest of the space for adequate parking and green space. That would still serve the needs of the ICCF to provide adequate housing for people who are in need, but it would also respect the neighbors on Mayhew Wood, on Kentucky, on Nevada, who those of us closest there are going to be most negatively impacted. And again, I've lived there for 35 years. It's a cul-de-sac, it's a quiet street, it's a quiet neighborhood. Those of us who've stayed there this long live there because we like that. And I think it's too much of a change and too much of a disruption. So I have to say I oppose the plan as it stands, but if an adjustment could be made, such as taking away that 2-story addition, scaling the project back to perhaps the 19 units, which would still provide a very nice amount of additional housing, could balance the whole situation out so that there would be more parking in the lot there, they wouldn't be parking on the streets.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else on this case? All right, come. Okay. All right, anyone else? All right, I will close the public hearing then. I'll invite the applicant up if there are things that you'd like to address that were raised during the public hearing.
Hi, I'm Jan Vanderwoord. I get to work with Dakota at ICCF. I would say that we've had really respectful conversations with all of the neighbors, and we feel that they have been respectful to us, even though this is uncomfortable, with the exclusion of one individual who wrote a lot of letters that a lot of us have seen. It's been really great. We understand that this is a change proposed to a neighborhood. It's really hard from our vantage point to see how the argument about traffic, as somebody who dropped 3 kids off at school this morning, can be claimed that a condominium development, a home ownership development, is going to have more traffic impact on this site than what the building was built for. I'm really just up here to reiterate, this site is not really low-density residential, other than that's how the map captured it. This is school building adjacent to now a church plus a refugee education center, adjacent to a bank, adjacent to a commercial corridor. This is that perfect gateway spot where we think that density makes sense. And if this was just about units, and this was just about the functionality and addressing community need of housing, people would be proposing a 3-story, 60-unit building here. We're talking about taking the lid off of an existing structure that is low to the ground and doing something very innovative, as Kim DeStichter, our architect, referenced. This is a very common format in Northern Europe, and it's supposed to feel well integrated within low-density areas, and we think it's really cute. We had a lot of good feedback from neighbors who said, that is adorable, I would live there. I will buy, like, a lot of market rate interest. And we get it, the car thing is a scary thing. We have sold condominiums in the past, and not everybody does own 2 cars when they don't have their own driveway. So hopefully this can be more a discussion or a decision related to the housing. Parking can kill great developments often, so happy to answer any questions.
All right, commissioners, questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
Jan, I'm just looking at the alignment or the curb cuts off Eastern, and it appears that they were constructed to accommodate the buses. And so is there any reason why they cannot be narrowed to improve the pedestrian connections crossing those curb cuts? I'm measuring them about 36 feet. And given the reliance on the bus for the parking waiver and just good pedestrian connectivity, it seems like those could be narrowed. Is that fair?
That's fair. And I think that we are in a unique space where we're trying to hang on to something that would never get approved in current form.
Correct.
But based on the amount of Amazon deliveries at the building that ICCF owns and operates, this is really convenient. All the mail is going to come through the front door. All of your food delivery, your visitors can get dropped off here, your Uber, whatever. If we need to change that curb cut and we can still maintain that pass-through drive, we're happy to do that. The site is going to go through extensive reconstruction. I think that that's a reasonable request, and we're happy to accommodate it. We've talked a lot. I'm guessing next question, just trying to deflect it, is going to be about the Nevada access point. Just to reiterate where ICCF's at, we want this development to happen because it's great housing infrastructure in a complementary setting. And if we have to change parking, we'll do it. We will change the parking if we need to. If we have to have a gate access for the fire truck off of Nevada, we will do that. It would be my preference personally, just back of the envelope here, that we get access for garbage truck there too, so that they don't have to impede the entirety of the parking lot. But we're willing to work out parking. Should have known we should have focused more on that because the housing doesn't seem to be getting critiqued too much.
In that turnabout, which you said is a great place for loading, unloading, and that kind of thing, I wondered if you need the whole thing for loading, if you couldn't put in some parking spaces for adjacent property owners and then have a couple spots for loading. I live in a condominium that's much more dense than this, and they have that parking in front. And we may have a fire alarm, right? Luckily, we have a fire person here. We have to leave.
All right.
So do we have to?
Dang, I got that 3:30 appointment.
Mike, do we need to take any action to pause?
think we were asking questions of the applicant. We weren't yet to our discussion. So,
Do you guys want us to start all the way at the
Nope.
beginning?
No.
No, thank you.
Let's not.
I think
Thanks, Jan.
I was in mid-sentence with just a suggestion, not a question, of considering in that might be additional parking as well as loading space by a sign.
On the front. If I could, maybe, Kristen, would you be willing to speak into that? Because my guess is we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate the suggestion for the additional parking, but the ordinance does not allow, that would be considered parking in our front yard, which we don't allow in this zone district.
Back to that point about thinning it up or maybe making it more pedestrian friendly and striping it effectively from front door across, though, I think this is still, it's quite developed in terms of schematic, but we're not done, and we're willing to meet all of those requirements.
can I push on the parking in the front yard thing a little bit? Is it not allowed at all or allowed with permission?
It would require a variance by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay. All right.
Now, we understand that, historically, it's been a loading and unloading zone. So I think the thought that passenger drop-off, the Uber Lyft concept, deliveries, probably move-in, move-outs, that would be consistent with the historical use of that drive lane. But to designate required parking would not be permitted.
When I went by there this morning, there were clearly 6 cars parked there, and they weren't loading or unloading anything, was my observation. But
Yeah,
I
and
understand the zoning
The
requirements.
satellite image shows that it's plenty wide, even if you just had one side, but
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it is not something the Planning Commission should be allowing as part of designated parking to support the site.
Could you respond to the rhetorical question about the number of units and potentially reducing the scale of the development?
Sure. I think that our first look at this, and I would presume some previous developers, other than Metro Health, when they were looking at it, first move is often to go much higher density than this. You see it all over town, right? 50 to 65 units, 3 to 4 stories, elevator building. So I would say that we've been very intentional and purposeful in trying to keep the scale, the massing, the sizing of this to a smaller scale. We don't have a full funded plan for this, to be totally honest. This is very much like a speculative leap of faith for us to try to take this on. We've had really nothing but positive outcomes from our other integrated mixed income home ownership developments. And so a lot of this will come down to just dollars and cents and sharing the cost of the land and the infrastructure that will go into this. Like, yes, there will be a brick facade on the first floor, but we're talking about taking the whole top off, right? Putting crazy trussing systems through this. It's not a cheap effort. This is not quick and dirty construction by any stretch of the imagination. And so there are benefits financially that make this project more viable with more units. So that's one piece of it. We also see it as a scale of need in the community. And we are talking about a pretty big balance. I know it doesn't relate specifically to the SLU, but of a balance of market rate versus what is more of an affordable or attainable rate too. And we're biased, obviously, but we think that our architect did a really great job integrating the addition, not to fake the previous building, but to kind of carry on the look and feel.
There were some comments here about bike storage as an amenity. Is that something that you will be doing?
Yeah, so we have, I think there's a few marked locations for outside bike racks, which wasn't your question. We do have some dead-ending closets and areas that do not have natural light, which lend very well to cart access, bike storage, or frankly, unit storage. So we're presuming the age bracket that will be drawn to this most might be empty nesters, and stuff has to go somewhere. And so we're trying to integrate and tuck storage wherever possible. There are some spaces that will work really well for bike storage here in the building footprint.
And you'll commit to that?
We will commit to that.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thanks. Commissioners, discussion on this.
I'm supportive of the project. I do feel that, we are seeing a lot of more dense, you take the size of property, more dense kind of buildings, and I think that the way the architecture is done, preserving the building, I like the idea of porches and decks and things like that. I think this complements the existing community. I also think that putting in the driveway is going to keep a lot of traffic off what was off of Nevada and Kentucky and further down Mayhewwood.
To clarify that point, are you suggesting the driveway without the cut-throughs to Nevada?
It sounds like that might, that's amenable to both the neighbors and to the developer, so yes, I would support that.
Okay. Others?
As we look at parking and the applicable parking waivers that we are to consider with the applicant's most recent affirmation of a willingness for covered secured bicycle parking spaces, the code allows us to waive parking because of that. The code allows us to waive certain numbers of spaces because of the proximity of the bus stop directly in front of this location. So just to address the concerns about parking from the neighbors, particularly, the code does allow us to consider those two things before we even consider the availability of on-street parking, which I know the neighbors are concerned about whether or not there's even enough on-street parking for current needs, let alone additional needs. Those two components are what the code allows us to consider. And so I think, we have to take into account the proximity of the bus stop as well as the applicant's recent affirmation of a willingness for internal secured parking, or bike storage, sorry.
Others?
Can we just confirm that they're willing to meet all of the green space canopy requirements? I feel like somebody talked about that. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, I feel like.
Yeah, our plan is to meet the green space requirement.
Great, thank you.
One of the other things, I'm sorry, Paul, one of the other things we're supposed to consider in terms of approval is massing and scale, and I appreciate the director's questions about the height differential of homes across the street on Mayhewwood and the architect's description of the sort of story and a half. I think that's appropriate massing to be more aligned with the composition of the existing neighborhood. So I think that that's important.
Yeah, especially directly across on Mayhewwood, it looks like there's a mix of 1 and 2 story or 1.5 story. I do think that the architecture with the dormers is appropriate. It does look like it fits nicely with a lot of the existing architecture.
I'm in support as well. I don't find the intensity of the use to be problematic. The concerns that were expressed were about things happening at all hours of the day as residential use. I don't know how that would be any different than any other type of housing development. And I think the density is within our boundaries. And so, yeah, I'm in support.
I'm also in support of this for many of the reasons that has already been stated. I do wish there was something that we could do about the traffic and the speeding down the residential streets, like speed bumps. I didn't know that the residents had to cover that, but that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying that for the record. But I do think that is something that we should look at. For just a few of the comments that were brought up, I feel like I say this every meeting, and I'll continue to do it until my last breath, that, a lot of this housing is, people who are within 90% can counting median income qualify for, which means even if you get a deal on a house, right? You are not immune to the fact that all other expenses right now are going up, which also means that the likelihood of you owning 2 cars or the likelihood of you being able to afford a house in this neighborhood for $477,000 is still low. And even if you are in that 90% range, you still sleep. You're not going to be up at 3 a.m. causing havoc for your neighbors. You're not going to drive faster. You are not going to be more prone to violence just because you make less than your neighbors. You're not going to make any more noise. You are a human being. You are a normal person, even if you make less than your neighbors. So I wanted to say that for the record, again, as always, that what we say matters and how we treat our neighbors, that matters. And so I think I'm in support of this project because we need this housing. This is a neighborhood that is becoming more walkable. And I don't see a lot of the changes, especially that were implied, actually happening because of the kind of project that this is. And so for that, I'll say once again for the record that we've got to watch not only what we say but how we treat our neighbors. And just because somebody moves in and makes less than you do doesn't make them any less valuable or worthy to live next to you. And with that, I'll hand it back.
All right, anyone else? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, speaking of traffic calming measures, I don't know if this is a question for Dan or excuse me, Jan or Dakota. Will the sidewalk along Mayhewood be removed as part of this project and then reconstructed?
We'll be keeping a sidewalk, so whether it's removing parts of it or certain elements of it to make sure it's safe and walkable for our neighbors, that is why we've constructed kind of sidewalks to each porch and things like that, just to make sure they're back connected to that existing, well, at least the existing space for it. Is that kind of your question?
Yes and no. I was sort of wondering if the sidewalk along Maywood would be removed because of the construction. When it's put back, could it be put back 2 feet further away from curb to provide adequate terrace area, the space between the sidewalk and the back of curb, to add trees? And/or we should explore the addition of some trees, because when we change the physical built environment of our infrastructure, of our streets, those in and of itself have traffic calming impacts.
Yes.
So, Kristen, is your question whether we should push the sidewalk further south on Mayhewwood to give more yard for
Further
more
north.
trees? We did not intend, we were not planning and didn't present that we were going to move the sidewalk.
Okay.
But I do think that what's shown, at least in rendering, which isn't a full plan set, is adding street trees to the yard spaces. So frankly, ICCF's not used to having this much green buffer. The sites that we are typically in are much denser and much tighter. So we're not used to that much lawn, let alone that much space for patios. Like, I believe each of those patio areas is it 8 feet wide? 6 to 8 feet wide.
7.
Okay, so Kim, our architect, is saying that the gray patios that are immediately to the south that are shown there are 7 feet in width, north to south, and obviously they're wider. So do we need to move the sidewalk if we're going to commit to putting street trees in the parkway area, in that yard?
It appears to me that just the neighborhood site plan looks like you're adding street trees on the other side of the sidewalks. I'm not sure that tree lawn between the sidewalk and the back of curb would be deep enough to accommodate trees. You're also dealing with power lines there, which is always a long-term concern that consumers is going to hack them up anyways. So
you just want us to sort of bump our sidewalk back, put the trees in front, and do that?
that's the question.
If possible, that would be ideal, understanding that there's perhaps some constraints. So perhaps the option B would be to add street trees on your side of the sidewalk to help mimic, because it is so close still to the back of curb, to help mimic street trees to create that kind of enclosed street. Right now, you've kind of got this this canyon effect as you approach Eastern, because your side of the street doesn't have a lot of
Right.
trees.
I think maybe it's clear already, but we would prefer to put yard trees on our side, on the private side. That would also inhibit consumers from hacking them apart and cutting the center out like they do every two years.
And that's fine too. I just thought if you were taking out the sidewalk, perhaps that was an opportunity to move it back. That was
Yeah,
really
and
the basis of my
if it's
question.
required, I think we're saying that we're willing to meet that. If there's an option for us to do yard trees versus Parkway street trees, we would go with yard.
I think that's consistent with most of Mayhew Wood as well. If you go down, there are some in the tree lawn, but most of them end up being yard trees in the front of houses. And there are a couple of relatively young trees that are already there. I don't know if they'll be able to remain there or if they'd be replaced, but certainly would want you to stick to this site plan that shows trees along that street.
Yep. That's fine. Sorry, I was just wondering if there was an opportunity there, but I think the plan in general as proposed accomplishes similar outcomes.
Right, and I think just to touch on the general point that, the valid concerns from neighbors too about lights shining into backyards or into front yards too. We've shown a landscape plan here that is very draft, but I think focusing on mitigating light going into people's houses at night is something that we will be consistent we'll address that through our design.
And not a question, but just to point out, we didn't talk about the landscape buffer and the 6-foot fence on the eastern edge of the development, buffering the low-density residential that's right there. But the plan does show, and you are committed to the appropriate landscape buffer as well as the 6-foot fence
Yes.
there.
And I believe that they would be driven by evergreen so that we have four-season coverage for that as well.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Would someone be willing to make a motion?
I will.
Okay.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use request of ICCF Community Homes to rehabilitate and expand a vacant building into a 27-unit multiple family development at 2550 Eastern Avenue Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zoning district, because the proposed use will support the goals of the 2002 Master Plan, Chapter 3, Great Neighborhoods, to provide a broad range of high-quality housing choices, maintain and increase the number and variety of housing units, allow for new housing product, allow for a range of housing types within all neighborhoods, be consistent with the recommendations contained in the 2002 Master Plan, Section 10.7, school reuse in a pre-World War II neighborhood context, which recommends giving preference to office, educational, and residential reuse of former school buildings, be appropriately located on a major city street. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of Section 5.12.08.e because the residential use is at an appropriate density for the size of the site, which allows for an efficient layout that is designed to comply with all site layout provisions of the zoning ordinance. All elements of the site design are harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to the size and type of the lot, the character of the neighborhood and adjoining property, and the type, size, and proportions of the buildings. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed building is consistent in scale and orientation with what is desired in the MCN neighborhood classification. The proposed use will result in an appropriate density for the neighborhood. The project maintains the neighborhood's unique character, enhancing its walkable scale and reinforces its sense of place. The proposed residential development will be located along a major street and transit route. The proposed use will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because the buildings and entrances will be appropriately oriented on the site. Adequate landscaping buffering will be provided between the parking lot and abutting properties. The parking area will be screened from view of the public right-of-way and neighboring properties. It allows for reasonable use of a vacant building and an unusually configured parcel. The proposed uses will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to the existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, or visual clutter because adequate setbacks will be provided to abutting residential uses. The proposed building will meet the transparency and facade variation requirements of the MCN neighborhood. Sound and light will be buffered by extensive landscaping. The proposed use would not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the proposed building will be placed at the RBL, reestablishing the street wall. The proposed building addition maintains the pedestrian experience along Mayhew Wood Drive. The proposed development will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practical because existing trees will be retained where possible. Trees and shrubs will be planted on site to meet the landscape buffer and tree canopy requirements. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services do already exist or would be provided at no additional cost because the applicant will be responsible for the construction of any new infrastructure necessary for the development. The proposed use would not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city because the additional units contribute to the tax base. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard Condition A approvals, that the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That a land use development services permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to the construction, demolition, or operation. That any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. That this approval shall take effect 16 days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision. 2, that the site shall meet all green site element requirements, including but not limited to green space, tree canopy, street trees, and landscape buffers. 3, that 1 curb cut shall be permitted to Nevada Street, and that do we want to insert here for the use of emergency vehicles only?
This condition is drafted for your consideration.
Oh, it has it down there, I see it.
Yeah, it does include that.
And the applicant shall work with staff to determine an appropriate treatment to facilitate emergency access only.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Any discussion? Go ahead.
I had 2 additional conditions for your consideration based on the conversation we had, and that was that the curb cuts on Eastern be reduced to the minimum width necessary, and that I believe there was one condition that secured bike parking be included.
I'll add that to my resolution.
Just because I don't know what that means. Minimum width necessary. It sounds like the applicant talked about trucks and other things moving in there. Can you be clearer about what we're obligating them to do?
Thank you. So my intent of that statement would be the minimum width necessary to accommodate the use of that drive as discussed. So it would need to be wide enough to accommodate service deliveries and U-Haul trucks, perhaps.
Yeah, that makes, just for the applicant's purpose, so you know what we're obligating you to. So, yeah, I can support that. Thanks.
One thing we didn't cover specifically in our discussion was the location of the dumpster enclosure. And are we comfortable with it as drawn? Or with the closure of the curb cuts on Nevada, is there a more appropriate space?
I think.
Or are we comfortable with city staff working with them?
I'm comfortable with city staff. It seems to me in their best interest to maybe reclaim those 2 parking places and move this. But if you want it as part of the motion.
Are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with it, and it would be my preference, because until we get a dimension site plan with the new circulation patterns, you know, it's probably not ideal in its location, but it also has the least impact to the surrounding neighborhoods. And so, surrounding neighbors, pardon me, because of just general proximity.
That lot to the east, who owns that, and is that a future home? It's an empty lot right now?
It is an empty lot. It's owned by the adjacent to the east homeowner.
Okay. I didn't know if we anticipated a home being put there and that dumpster enclosure being
It's the
immediately
man with the
adjacent.
plaid shirt. He owns it.
Got it. All right, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to be sensitive to a potential future home immediately adjacent to a dumpster enclosure.
Yep, absolutely, I agree. We can certainly work with ICCF as they fine-tune the dimensions of their parking lot to see where it could go. If it can go somewhere else that's even less impactful, that would certainly be our desire as well.
Okay.
For us, the design of the circulation pattern so that a garbage truck can pull through and then back up to that location, we can't guess right now, but we're not going to put it immediately next to a house.
Okay. Thank you. All right, any other discussion? Does that need to be a condition that they'll work with them, or is it covered in our discussion here?
That's typically a part of the LUD's permit review process.
Okay.
Which you've already stated that site elements, including but not limited to, shall be met.
Okay. All right, if there's no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our next case is 101, 119, and 135 Garden Street Southeast. Elizabeth will take us through this case as well.
And I apologize, Planning Commission, I'm going to swap out with Tyler as I have childcare obligations this afternoon.
You can sit up in the front. We're friendly.
I'll sit up front.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is a request to rezone 101, 119, and 135 Garden Street Southeast from SDIT, Special District Industrial Transportation, to a planned redevelopment district. And this is being requested to facilitate construction of the Hope Village development. The project includes 16 detached tiny homes, 10 second-floor apartments, community amenities, as well as tenant space. You can see the subject property is in the SDIT zone district. To the north, we have mixed-density residential, and it is currently improved with medium-low-density homes. To the east, you can see there are 4 lots. These, if you've been out to the site, you can see that the improvements on these site have been removed. There's no pavement there anymore. There are 4 new single-family homes proposed there to be constructed by this applicant. And then to the south, we have industrial, and to the west, we have industrial as well. So I just want to reiterate the reason we are talking about a planned redevelopment district. It is a rezoning, and so the site plan and the approvals, the ordinance that would be adopted is how this site would be governed. A PRD is a procedure that is intended to encourage innovative land use and design, or land planning and design, by allowing greater flexibility, encouraging a mix of land use. And so it's often used in unique circumstances. And as if you've looked at the packet, you would see that that is where we are here. This is a rather unique project. The property is located in, you can see that it's just east of Division, and it is included in the South Division corridor plan, specifically addressed in the focus area 4. So I'm not sure the focus area really, well, it does address this, but it didn't really dig into it in great detail. But there are some things that this project does address that are recommendations of the plan, which is specifically development without displacement. It recommends that redevelopment of vacant or underutilized property by responsible developers who work holistically with the community, and development of new housing with emphasis on filling extremely low, very low, and market rate gaps. In this focus area 4, let's see here, I think it's right under this little picture here, our development site. It does say that the easterly portion of the site is designated for employment uses, and the portion of the block that fronts South Division, which is shown, do I have that right? Yeah, right here, is designated for mixed-use, transit-oriented development. The 2002 master plan does talk about a range of housing choices, as well as restructuring of these older industrial sites into mixed-use sites. So those are some things to keep in mind as we discuss this. I would also mention that before I go into the details, the things that we really want to keep in mind are the consistency of the development with the master plan, which I just went over, the uses, the density, the site layouts and setbacks, and how it transitions into the neighborhood. We want to look at scale and massing, all those same things that we looked at in the last in the last project you considered. Here, actually, I think I want to start here. There's an existing building on the site and lots of pavement. They plan to keep the existing building and remove the pavement. This is the site plan. It includes 16 detached tiny homes in an arrangement that would not be typical for the TN zone district, so that's something to keep in mind. We don't, you can see that these homes are oriented toward this common path. This is a pedestrian way, and so the homes are oriented inward Traditionally, in a TN zone district, as you know, entrances are to be oriented to the street. So we have sides and rears of these small homes that may be, adjacent to a side of a home. So it is an atypical arrangement, so I'd ask you to keep that in mind. There are 11 homes proposed of 240 square feet and 5 homes of 480 square feet. In addition, 10 dwelling units, 10 apartments are proposed in the existing industrial building on the second floor. They're also proposing amenities such as laundry and a community room for all the residents of the site. There's also some office space proposed in this section that I'm pointing to in the eastern part of the industrial building that may be used for the applicant's office and for, associated social service uses. To the western portion of the building, they're planning on white boxing that. It's going to be a large, it's about 10,000 square feet, I believe. It's a large tenant space, and it could be used for a range of uses. Regarding those range of uses, staff is recommending that we assign the TCC zone district to this portion of the building, the Transitional City Center. And the reason that we chose that district is because it is a district that allows some industrial uses, as in the SDIT industrial district, but it also allows residential, commercial, office, social service. It allows a great range of uses, but without a lot of that heavy industrial that that could be permitted in the IT zone district. To allow flexibility in the space, staff is recommending that we include that certain special land uses be allowed as permitted uses for this tenant B space. That would be kind of some light industrial assembly manufacturing uses because it is a rather large space, artisanal and creative industry, and warehousing. And that would just allow the applicant to be able to rent out to a range of users. And so the Planning Commission should determine if you find that to be appropriate. As far as the density goes, because this is a little bit unusual, what I did is I just took the residential portion and I figured out the density of the detached residential portion. I didn't do it across the entire thing, but, and also I did that because it is sort of a transition to the single family or, lower density residential surrounding it. So that really, the density there, is actually fairly low. The proposed project with 16 dwelling units comes out to be, oops, where's my dwelling units per acre? Oh, a little bit less than 20 dwelling units per acre. In the TN LDR, the maximum density is almost 22 dwelling units per acre. So it isn't a terribly high density, is what I'm trying to say. It appears to be an appropriate density. I I won't go into the details of all these, about the setbacks, but as I said before, just remember, we have some different sides of the building, or how can I say this? Because the homes aren't oriented toward the street, as would be typical in a TN district, you have different elevations of the homes facing different ways. For instance, building G, it's oriented toward the internal path, but it's looking at the neighbor there. Let's see, D and C, they've got, the backs of the buildings would be toward the rear of the lots to the north, but you can see that the setbacks are much closer. Normally, it would, in the MDR, it would be minimum of 20 feet. These are shed-sized buildings, I should mention. It's like they're smaller than a garage. They're more like a shed, but they're like 10 feet away from the lot line. So keep that in mind, okay? And then we have that same kind of arrangement over here on the east. We have the rear of the building, I guess it's actually going to be oriented toward the rear of the neighbor, but the side of the building is going to be facing Garden Street. Same with P, and then LMNO will have the backs of the buildings facing Garden. So that's what's really different about this, and that's why the PRD is what is where we landed. Landscaping is proposed, and we'll review that at permitting to make sure that it meets all the requirements. Let's see here. Oh, I should talk about parking. 23 parking spaces are proposed in 2 parking lots, and they are reducing the overall number of curb cuts, so additional street parking will be created. These were probably original single-family homes, and there were some curb cuts along here, or that might have been for the parking lot. But at any rate, parking was sort of tricky to look at here. These are definitely affordable homes. They're all intended as affordable units. And so there was a couple different ways to look at it. I think maybe a straightforward way to look at it would be to use the TCC zone district. Again, I talked about the transitional nature of that. The parking requirements of the TCC are quite low, though. So, for all the dwelling units with the low income, the affordable parking reduction, office use and industrial use, that would equal 23, which is exactly the number that they have. You could also, treat those the tiny homes as single-family homes. The parking requirement would be much higher, though, and it really is unlikely that all those, the residents there will all have cars. So, feel free to ask me, further questions about that. But I did think about this, and this seemed like the best way to address it. The PRD requirements for parking are really, it's based on auto-oriented requirements, and they are quite high, and that would not really be even though this is a PRD, I would not say it's appropriate for this location. So if you disagree with my assessment of using the TCC, you can grant parking waivers based on on-street parking and transit. And they could also add bike rooms as well for the apartment units. As far as elevations go, for the existing building, some changes are going to be made, but it's not significant. They'll be opening up a lot of the windows and, replacing the windows. The one, let's go. There we go. The one concern that I had that I think the Planning Commission should talk about is this window right up here on the north elevation. Right now, it was all filled in with glass block, and they're proposing new windows, and these are dwelling units here, and I think this is going to be metal siding in between. So there's that material, and then also the spacing of the windows. I'm not sure, I don't know that that's a deal breaker, but I just wanted to bring that up. And here are some renderings of the building. And then on to the tiny homes. I'll let the applicants talk about these in detail, but the one element that I wanted to point out was the materials, and the siding that's proposed is a material called LP Smart Side, and generally that's not a material we like to see or we allow as a primary building material. It's an engineered wood, and it's not generally on our materials, our approved building materials for single-family homes. We'd rather see vinyl siding or fiber cement board, but this might be an issue of cost, affordable housing versus materials. So maybe the applicants can talk a little bit more about this material. And I'll just go back to the nice renderings they had here of how they envision the homes looking, and the common space there. A garden is proposed. Okay, and I think I've covered everything. I didn't receive any letters of support or opposition, but the applicant did robust neighborhood outreach, which they can tell you about.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Elizabeth at this time?
Elizabeth, relative to the PRD zoning, I know that locks the design in. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, what happens if they find this to be wildly popular, which I think it will be, and maybe want to say, add more small units or make some changes on the site? Are they bound to these particular locations and these particular structures? How does that go?
Yeah, the staff does have some latitude to allow some modifications, but density wouldn't be one of them. So if they wanted to increase the density, that would be a major amendment that would come back to the Planning Commission and City Commission.
Elizabeth, can you talk to and maybe this is better for the applicant, but to the operation of the community? In other words, snow plowing, lighting within, because this is such an unusual organization. Can you speak to that, or?
I think that would be best for the applicant to address, if you don't mind.
Great, thanks.
Are these rentals or are they home ownership?
I bet you the applicant will tell you all about that.
Okay.
All right, if there's no other questions, I'll invite the applicant up if you want to share some additional details with us.
Good afternoon. My name's Jonathan DePoy with Naderveld. We are the land planning and engineering consultants for this project / proposed request. I'm joined here this evening by Scott Jonkoff and by Bill Pettinga and by Dennis Van Kampen representing Meltrotter Ministries, the property owner and the applicant, and by Chip Clark from Dixon Architecture. Chip, I'll leave it up to you on if you want to respond to that question about building materials. Elizabeth, thank you. She did a great job on diligently introducing this project to you. And also note that we agree with the additional recommendations that she made and suggested. There's just two additional things that I'll add to the conversation in your consideration of our proposal. The first is the important work that Meltrotter has been engaged in throughout the years and throughout the city of Grand Rapids for more than a century now. And they have a good reputation that they have in the community, which has grown throughout the years. The same holds true for Next Step of West Michigan, which is now a division of Meltrotter Ministries, although admittedly they have not been at it as long as Meltrotter has been around. As we mentioned in our submittal, community engagement was a critical component of this project, which happened through community stakeholder meetings, front porch neighbor surveys, and a neighborhood housing event that took place on the evening of May the 31st. Not to mention all of the spontaneous conversations that occur almost on a daily basis. In our engagement, we found overwhelming support from the neighborhood and the community for this endeavor. It's been kind of humbling. But more importantly, this project was designed with listening ears, and it proposes to do what the community says they want to do. The second thing that I was prepared to discuss is why we think this project is good for the city of Grand Rapids. This project provides housing at a price that people can afford, and that's a good thing. Also, the tiny home housing type, it presents a unique opportunity for people on a path to home ownership. In our review of the South Division Corridor Area Specific Plan, which is the ASP of the subject property, we found that in Chapter 4 it includes a case study on tiny homes. And their tiny home projects are recommended to have, quote, strategic purpose to affect positive change, and were specifically selected as priority projects that will catalyze creative positive activity through interconnection of new services and uses for the South Division Corridor and surrounding community. Interestingly enough, Next Step of West Michigan was even mentioned as a potential project partner. The renovation of a rundown building that is part of this project is also something good for the city and mentioned as a priority in your master plan. This renovated effort will bring new life to the Southtown area and provide additional housing for low-income residents. It also will provide community resources on the ground floor. It's our hope that this project is viewed as a partnership with you and that you will feel invited to participate in this good work and do everything that you can to see that it's successful and perhaps even something to duplicate. We are available to answer any questions that you may have. Any questions about the site layout, utilities, or engineering can be directed to myself. Any questions for the ownership can be directed to Scott Jonkoff from Meltrotter, and any architectural questions may be directed to Chip Clark from Dixon Architecture. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I still had the same question about how lighting and care for common spaces will be managed.
started. Sorry, it's a question of like who's.
It's such a good question. You all want to answer it, I know.
It's a great question, but it involves utilities, easements, so that's kind of his area.
Yeah, I just need the high level, and I'll just tell you what I'm most concerned about is just safety for your residents. So what does the lighting and care of the common spaces look like? What are the obligations of the tenants? You know, kind of what would this community be expected to do versus what y'all will do as the...
I mean, first off, we're trying to present a front porch community, so...
Would you mind stepping up to the microphone, and also could you state your name for the record? Thank you.
My name is Chip Clark. I'm with Dixon Architecture. So to address the comment about general lighting in the community, first off, it's a front porch focused community, so where all the homes are aimed towards a central pedestrian corridor. And that scale, with that front porch style, the lighting provided at each front porch would then spill over and help illuminate that general walkway along with general pedestrian lighting. So we're still working out where we would provide illumination, whether it's like low-level baluster lighting or whether it's higher level, almost like parking lot style lighting. That scale is to be, I think, still resolved. We'd like to shy away from a high level lighting and more to a lower level style of lighting. It's more appropriate, I think, with the scale of the community and a pedestrian walkway. But we're open to that right now. That still requires lighting level assessments of the entire site. Sorry. And yeah, just general approval on the arrangement, first off, of the community and the development in there before we can dive into that next level of lighting as to where placement and quantity occurs.
I think to add to Stacy's question, are these individually owned? Are they condominiums or are they
not
rentals?
Necessarily inappropriate.
Oh,
The
I'm
ownership
sorry.
or rental isn't necessarily part of our
Well,
purview, but I
think
guess
it goes to
a question
what-
about like a common area maintenance
Yeah.
or who's caring for the common area is appropriate.
And I'll speak to that, and that's why I first thought to look to the client, because this question is kind of loaded where, you know, if you talk about snow removal and things like that, you know, it's kind of up to the ownership on how they want to handle that. I can say in terms of the design, the pathway will be cemented, so that will make for easy snow removal. You know, whether or not the snow will be removed by Mel Trotter, it will be some kind of programming within their ministry for the residents that are living there. Whether it's a homeowner association, those details have not been have not been decided. Is that a fair answer?
Hey, everybody. My name's Scott Youngkoff, and I'm the founder of Next Step. Started about 15 years ago. Next Step will be the general contractor on this project. And then Next Step and Mel Trotter have merged about 2 years ago. So that's my relationship. So in relation to lighting, it's interesting because our offices and warehouse are directly across the street at 100 Garden. And so when we renovated that space, the questions were around, hey, you're putting off too much lighting, right? So now we're going across the street and it's like, we got to make sure we have enough lighting. We get it. We want to make it a safe space. So whether it's lights up high along the pathway, like Jonathan or Chip mentioned, whether it's along the sidewalk, we'll certainly light that up, and there'll be some lights on the front porches as well. We want to, we're going to become a presence on Fair Street, the street just to the north of Garden. That'll open that up. The pathway will connect us to Fair Street, and that's a good thing that will be a presence on Fair Street. And to be quite honest, there's some real challenges that'll be as a presence on Fair Street. So we want to be mindful of the folks that live there, whether they're renting at a maximum of 80% AMI, or we're exploring and would love to do some things with some home ownership possibly. So that's still to be determined. But either way, for snow removal, That could be part of a rental agreement. They rent out, we've been talking about things like $1 per square foot possibly. Those are some of the internal conversations that we're having. So if it were rented out, that could be a requirement of the rent agreement, taking care of the lawns, taking care of the snow. Or if it's a part of an ownership, it could be something in like a site condo type document. But either way, the folks that will live there will be responsible for the maintenance. And then with us right across the street being a presence, we can oversee that and enforce that, if you will, too.
Any other questions for the applicant at this point?
I just have a quick question about trash. So I'm just trying to imagine myself living here, right? So if I live in A, the trash receptacles are over in the second parking lot. Is that those receptacles are intended for use by the residents in the development?
Right. Yeah, we talked about that. That was my question as well. People are going to lug their trash basically all the way over there. One of the solutions to that, I think, is we could have some rollaway carts for a portion of these properties on the easternmost edge of it, where they could be rolled out and city refuge could pick up those carts, similar to what's happening in the neighborhoods.
Okay.
Could someone address the building materials and why you couldn't meet our zoning ordinance for building materials?
Sure. Regarding, well, let's see, so there's two materials in question. The initial one, oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Do you want to start with yeah, we can start with that one. Okay. That's fine. On the back side, so bottom left-hand corner, image 3, northeast corner from Fair Street. What's proposed is a vertical metal siding, metal lap siding product. So we're not talking about corrugated metal. This is actually a higher-end product that looks more like your traditional shipboard or shiplap style siding. Scale would be anywhere between, say, a 6-inch profile and a 12-inch profile. They vary in between, and the proposal is a vertical orientation. So something that is in contrast to the existing painted brick facade over there, but also works in a kind of orientation that's complementary with the rhythm of the windows suggested inside that existing rough opening where the glass block used to be.
And how is it fastened?
Like a traditional siding, so it's a hidden fastener system. So if you took, let's say, your typical vinyl siding in a horizontal orientation, it's fastened at the top, and then it's installed bottom to top. The next piece clips in, goes in, and you fasten. This would be fastened in a similar fashion, except left to right or right to left because of its vertical orientation. And then as far as the materials proposed on the tiny homes, the LP Smart Siding, there may have been maybe some associations with a former building product from 30 to 50 years ago. Pressboard siding is like particle sawdust. That is not what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is actually, it is an engineered wood product. It's more of an oriented strand composition, a pressboard made out of chips, has a textured surface, and is actually considered, at least when we specify it in a lot of our products or projects, equal to, if not better, depending on the client, equal to fiber cement siding. So this is, it can carry a lap siding profile, shiplap siding profiles, numerous exposure styles, and is designed to work with its own trim composition catalog as well. We see this going up on a lot of high-end homes, actually a home right beside mine being built right now. The entire house and its riding barn have been sided in this exact same product. I've suggested this in lieu of a fiber cement product because of its ease of workability. Fiber cement is difficult to cut, requires respiration, is heavy, tedious product to work with at times, and this is also a much higher end product than vinyl siding. but I am more than happy to go with vinyl siding from a cost standpoint. So I'll leave it up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd rather see something like a vinyl siding, we're not set on this. We're open to suggestions.
Another question about safety and access. So there, just so I'm clear on the site plan, there's one thoroughfare from Garden to Fair, which is, I guess this would be north, right, or east of the development?
Garden to
Elizabeth, can you
Fair
pull
would
up-
be north, yeah.
So how do emergency vehicles access these, the D, C, B, E, those units? Especially if we don't have exactly a plan on how we're maintaining that sidewalk.
So I'll begin by saying that's not like a vehicular road there. This was reviewed like by the fire department, and they approved this plan. They didn't have a problem with the layout.
Okay.
If that's what the concern was.
Yeah, just again, access. And my questions are, this is a unique, we're passing something or theoretically passing something. This is the first time we're going to do this. And I agree that there'll be a lot of enthusiasm for developments like this. So we just want to get it right.
Yeah, we agree. There was intentional discussion about emergency access, and we included the fire department in that conversation, and they looked at the plan and they approved it. We had a design team meeting and all that. They were part of it.
Great, thank you.
I need to absent myself from the meeting, but thank you for your presentation.
Okay. If there are no other questions for the applicant, I will open up the public hearing. If you're here today on this case, please come forward, state your name, and share your thoughts with us. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Turn to commissioners for additional questions, comments, or discussion.
I just have a process question. So we approve this or recommend it to City Commission for review and approval. Does it come back to us for final approval in any way once there's some finalization around no, once the City Commission does it, they're done?
Not unless you found it necessary. We didn't. We didn't find we found this project to be such that it didn't need to come back to you. But if you find that you want it to come back for final site plan review, that would be okay.
No, thanks for that. And then the final process question is to my earlier point around precedent. Elizabeth, can you speak to whether or not something like this, whether it's approved by City Commission, sets a certain precedent around PRDs like this?
What is unique, I think, specifically about this one, well, does it set a precedent? I'm going to say no, because every site is unique. And this has several unique aspects, that you have the single-family detached and then the mixed-use building. So I would say this is unique in that way. Over the years, we've had lots of people approach us about tiny homes. And, we said, oh, well, you can do them, but the issue is that it can only, right now, our zoning ordinance requires a minimum house, detached single-family home to be 750 square feet. However, if you had just the tiny home portion, that would be considered multiple family, and we could do that. There may be opportunities to do another tiny home development as a special land use. People just haven't pursued it.
Thanks.
All right, discussion, commissioners.
I think this is a great project and in a good spot. I think this is something that not only is the space being utilized to fulfill the housing need, but it's also taking a space that has become a little bit run down and could use some refreshing and build more of a community there rather than just an industrial corridor, a manufacturing corridor. Yeah, I'm in support of this one.
I think it's remarkable how many parts of our master plan this hits right on the button, and particularly the 2002 master plan with transportation and where things are located, being on the edge. I'm always concerned about losing IT zone district in the city. But I think that these improvements to this part of the IT zone district will actually enable actual workforce in a positive way. So I think it's well done, and I'm definitely in support of it.
Well, I'm a tiny home enthusiast, so I really appreciate that this is here in our city. I think it solves a lot of problems, but it also is an opportunity for us to explore if this is possible in other spaces. So thank you for bringing this project to us. I do share similar concerns as Commissioner Beeler about, it sort of seems like there are some things that haven't been decided that we usually like to know going into this, related to the safety of the individuals involved, lighting and snow removal, et cetera, trash. But I trust the Planning Commission and you will work that out in a way that is favorable and safe. So I'm in support of this as well.
All right. Yeah, I agree. I'm also in support of this. And I would agree. I think that some of those things would have been nice to have figured out, but I think the fact that the developer is next door, some of that is issues they'll have to work out as part of this. So, and hopefully that can be somewhat worked out in the LUDs and permitting process. But would someone be willing to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Now therefore be resolved that the Planning Commission recommends that the City Commission approve the request of Mel Trotter Ministries, Gordon Oosting, to rezone 101, 119, and 135 Garden Street Southeast to special district planned redevelopment district to facilitate construction of 16 detached homes and redevelopment of an existing industrial building into 10 apartments, community amenities, and tenant space for the following reasons. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because all elements of the site design are harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood, and adjoining property. Safe, convenient, and well-defined vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation within and to and from the site is provided. The use, density of development, and the design of the proposed PRD are consistent with the master plan and the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance because the proposed development supports the goals of the 2002 master plan, Chapter 3, Great Neighborhoods, to provide a broad range of high-quality housing choices, maintain and increase the number and variety of housing units, allow for new housing products, allow for a range of housing types within all neighborhoods, addresses several desired outcomes of Chapter 4, development without displacement, including the redevelopment of vacant or underutilized property by responsible developers who work holistically with the community, and development of new housing with emphasis on filling extremely low, very low, and market rate gaps. The proposed PRD will ensure efficient development on the property and will result in a logical and orderly development pattern in the neighborhood because the proposed setbacks of the proposed homes respect and are consistent with the surrounding development, and adequate connections to existing walkways and public sidewalks are proposed, and the proposed buildings will reestablish the street wall. The proposed development will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the existing or planned character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed building design and high-quality materials meet the characteristics important in planned redevelopment districts. The development will result in an appropriate density for the site, and the project maintains the neighborhood's unique character, enhancing its walkable scale and reinforces its sense of place. Potentially adverse effects arise from proposed development on the neighborhood and adjacent properties will be minimized through the provision of adequate on-site parking, appropriate building orientation entrances, and design. The proposed development will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future adjacent uses or to the public welfare because the street network is adequate to support any traffic increase. The site is located near public transit, and there is no reason to anticipate excessive noise, glare, or visual clutter from this development. Connections for pedestrians and vehicles are provided via new internal walkways provided between buildings, uses, and amenities. The proposed development will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practicable. Because few quality trees exist on the site is mostly improved with buildings or paved, and adequate green space and stormwater detention will be provided. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services already exist or will be provided at no additional public cost and will safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. Because the subject property is located in close proximity to public transit and major streets and is currently served with public utilities. The applicant will be responsible for the construction of any infrastructure improvements necessary to support the development. The proposed development will be detrimental. The proposed development will not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city because the scale and design of the proposed development does not place an excessive burden on services currently furnished or may be required by the city. And the investment represented by this project is anticipated to have a stabilizing effect on the neighborhood. Wherever practicable, the proposed development will provide amenities including but not limited to park and recreational facilities, urban open space, and non-vehicular connections that serve a public purpose because the development will maintain significant green space for the visual relief of nearby residents and will provide common recreational amenities for residents. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Are these the same as set A? Okay. That the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. 3, that a land use development services, LUD's permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. 4, that the site shall meet all green site element requirements, including but not limited to green space, tree canopy, street trees, and landscape buffers. 5, that the detached homes may be clad in LP Smart Side as proposed. Are we okay with that? That the TNTCC zone district shall be assigned for uses in the mixed-use portion of the project, with the following special land uses allowed as permitted uses in the Tenant B space. A, assembly, manufacturing, or production of textile products, technology, wood products, furniture and fixtures, paper, clay, glass, or fabricated metal, artisanal and creative industry, 5,000 square feet or more, and C, warehousing. 7, for the purpose of signs, the mixed-use commercial portion of the site shall be assigned the TNTCC Zone District, with the residential portion of the site assigned residential to facilitate installation of a development entry sign. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policy and state laws, and that this approval shall take effect as required by the City Commission approval in accordance with Section 5.12.12.g of the zoning ordinance.
Support.
All right, do we have a motion and support? Any final discussion?
May I ask, oops, sorry.
Supported by
Me, Stacy
Commissioner
Bueller.
Bueller.
I'd ask that you possibly entertain one additional condition that be specific to Miss Bueller's, Commissioner Bueller's issues or concerns with the amenities, lighting, snow removal, that it be up to the petitioner to find a way to address those concerns as part of the approval. For the lighting, the landscaping, and the snow removal, how that be maintained be up to them.
So I guess I'm confused. So we're looking for a condition that they work with city staff, planning staff, to establish a plan for safety and snow removal.
Correct.
As part of the approval?
Correct.
I can support that.
Okay.
I get clarity on that.
Sure.
My question is if that has to come back to the planning commission, or is that just working with the city staff?
Yes.
It would be handled with staff. All right, any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our last case is 1050 Fuller Ave Northeast. Sarah will take us through this case.
Hi, Commissioners. So for our last case today, we have Life EMS at 1050 Fuller Avenue Northeast requesting approval to incorporate an electronic message center into a new monument sign along Fuller Avenue. Electronic message centers that are across the street from a residential zone district, technically within 300 feet, would require special land use approval, which brings them here today. The zone district for this property is in the NOS zone district, which is neighborhood office service. As you can see, it's pretty much surrounded by residential zone districts with the exception of a business district just to the north there. I think it's important to note before I move forward that just to the southeast of the subject property is a current Life EMS building. They purchased this land and renovated the subject building in 2021 as well as this year to make improvements to sort of create a Life EMS campus at these two properties. Here is an image of the proposed signage. We'll review that briefly now, but importantly, we'll get into what's proposed and what is permitted. When we look at this table here, almost everything meets the requirements. However, the exception would be the electric messaging center sign itself. So this one is a little bit tricky in that if you are incorporating colors or logos or branding that matches the commercial use, we have to consider that as part of the signage as well. So when we're looking at this, because this green and yellow checkered pattern is found on their I almost said merchandise, but their apparel, their uniforms, their vehicles, we consider that commercial speech. And so looking at the table here, you'll notice that because of that, they're just over the required or maximum 50% of the total sign area. So we would ask that the commissioners take that into consideration and maybe advise the applicant to somehow incorporate that onto the top panel here where their company name is located, rather than on the same panel as the electronic messaging center. In terms of placement, it meets all of the setback requirements. It does not impede on the clear vision area requirement. And the applicant has also indicated that the required 200 square feet of landscaping would be implemented at the base of the sign. Importantly, because their campus or operations have taken place in this neighborhood for the past 30 years, they actually have a great relationship with the neighborhood and did receive full support from the neighborhood association. Beyond that, I don't really have anything else to add. I'll defer some of the specifics to the sign and what they'd like to advertise on it. So at this point, I will take any of your questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff at this time? Okay, thanks. I'll invite the applicant up if there's other details you want to share with us.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Meyer, President of Life EMS Ambulance, and Brian Bermania is President of Legend Signs that has produced this draft, does all of our on-site building signage, as well as the many vehicles that you see running around and stuff with our graphics and whatever. Yours truly used to sign those in the day, but nonetheless, that was a few decades ago. But thanks for hanging in there, long day, etc. And we can get into any level of detail. Some people in this room know I can talk for about 40 minutes on whatever. But the primary usage of this sign and why we wanted to do a message center in all seriousness is that Life EMS is one of the few fully accredited paramedic training institutions in the state, among other things. And we discovered, or kind of was amplified, of course, through the pandemic, that we had to greatly increase our training program in addition to recruiting from other training programs. Hence our acquisition of the former Red Cross building, which is contiguous to the rest of our campus, and we bought the back part of the property from the Red Cross behind the Blood Center years ago, and what have you. And so this building is going to consolidate all of our EMT and paramedic training for the Grand Rapids area, as well as we're one of the larger American Heart Association training centers. And so we support specialized training and advanced cardiac life support and all sorts of other things. In addition to that, we do routine, open to the public CPR training on a monthly basis. And so the focus of the sign is to basically alert people to the next EMT class coming up, which we are doing a ton of that now in an academy style, and also with the area high schools and stuff in a school to work program and those kinds of things to get people into EMS as a career to serve the community, as well as identifying that next Tuesday night's our next CPR training program, that kind of thing. And we're certainly happy to guarantee that you would never see my face on that sign if that's a requirement of this approval. But that's really the primary focus, is just to kind of alert folks to kind of that training schedule and what's accessible. And we're doing a lot of training now, like especially with EMT and paramedic, where folks can come work for us, and with a work commitment, you basically get a full scholarship for doing that training. So we're hiring a lot of folks in the community, and this is kind of, was mentioned earlier by staff. We've been in this neighborhood since 1989, facing onto Cedar Street, between the Blood Center and the Ronald McDonald House, and the area is kind of developed into a human services area, but this is a way to attract folks and a higher visibility that EMS is a great career. And so our Grand Rapids campus supports our entire operation. We're in 10 counties in West Michigan. We cover about 4,600 square miles of West Michigan from a paramedic 911 response standpoint. So we've got a big pipeline to fill from a professional perspective. So, and Brian certainly can address the any particulars with the sign, but that's kind of the genesis of why we're looking for it.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, questions for the applicant?
How quickly does a sign turn over?
Brian Romania, Legend Sign. As fast as you want it to, however, the city has regulations on that.
Okay.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
So
I couldn't
it
remember.
can change once every 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay. Couldn't remember that, yeah.
And really, our application is a great question, that we would probably leave some of these images up longer than you would typically see on this sign, because we're promoting very specific training classes and not 4,000, other things, so.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be clear, because I think it's one of the questions around permitted versus proposed, the colored backer of behind the actual electronic message center, that's static, right? The yellow and green, right? So that's not actually, I know that the staff has identified that as part of the electronic message center, but that's not actually changing. That's just a colored background, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The message center itself is 15.375 square feet, or about, which is less than half, which would meet the requirements. I don't necessarily consider the yellow and green branding, because it's more of identification for ambulances with reflective vinyl for visibility purposes. And yes, it looks like they're ambulances, but I don't think I've ever put that on their buildings or anything else. So it's not necessarily a branding. It just identifies their particular units.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions?
And I have to almost apologize for taking up your time for this, especially after a long day. The project itself is very significant. So, we're talking about the sign today, but also I just want to emphasize that the remodel and et cetera of the existing Red Cross building that has been there for about 50 years, where I took my first advanced first aid training almost that long ago in the unfinished basement there. But at any rate, it is a very significant project, and so I hate to just be here just talking about the sign. But anyways, and one last little trivia thing is we were using the lower level for our training folks for many years, and then there were some environmental and kind of sewer issues with the building with its age and stuff that we had to move out of there before we acquired it, and have now dealt with all that. So.
All right. If there's no other questions at this point, I'll have you take a seat.
Thank you.
I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today on this case, please come forward and state your name and share your brief thoughts with us. Okay.
Excuse me, just on that note, we did, of course, send out letters to the neighbors, and I was able to talk to the neighbor directly across the street, and the homeowner is he's fine with it.
All right. I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, any additional questions, comments, or discussion? Are you all satisfied with the explanation of the size of the sign, considering the green and yellow part of the electronic message board or not?
Well, let's have it, Paul.
Yeah, come on, Paul.
I've heard a lot of sign cases in my time here, and what I've learned is that it's best to strictly follow our ordinance. And if the staff has made a determination on how that is interpreted, I will follow the staff's determination. So I'm, just to say, I'm in support of the sign, but I think it should follow our ordinance.
Is the reason that it's included as part of the measurements of the message center because it's in the same panel, like the same box? Because you said if that were on the upper part, it wouldn't be considered, but that's because of the cabinet that it's an odd way to, I understand Paul's perspective, but I do think it's an odd way of considering the measurements when we might otherwise think just the changeable portion of the cabinet should be considered electronic message board.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing like with wall signs. If someone has, their sign cabinet with their logo, but let's say they have a red stripe behind that sign cabinet, and the red stripe is featured on any of their materials that they pass out or, their merchandise, whatever it may be. If we feel that it fits in with the branding or the commercial speech of the company, then we include that in with the square footage calculation. But like I said, if it's in that top portion, then we would just measure the actual electronic message center, which, as they said, fits well within the requirements.
If you can come to the mic if you've got if you have a question. I'm not sure it'll.
While Mark's making his way up there, I have a question for Sarah. So if the cabinet was all green, you wouldn't count it?
Probably not. It's the fact that the yellow and green checkered pattern is featured on their vehicles, it's featured on their uniforms, it's featured on their educational materials. And so therefore I determined that it is part of their overall branding, even though I don't think branding might be the right word, but the commercial speech of the commercial business.
Okay.
How would if they use just the same, let's say, hex code for the green then, instead of the checkered pattern with the yellow, that would still be considered part of their brand, right? It's their color. That color is their brand, and it'd be hard to differentiate this green compared with the green that's on their vehicles or their uniform. So it would still be a part of their commercial speech, even if it was just solid green.
But I think when we think about seeing a Life EMS vehicle pass us by, we're seeing that checkered pattern on it. We're not seeing a solid green, this color green vehicle. And so it's really just that there's that flash of pattern in the background that's bringing it into the square footage of the EMC. If it was a solid green, I might be amenable to looking at that administratively with the rest of the planning staff and seeing, okay, is this something that it kind of suits both parties involved?
Go ahead.
So, and along those lines, and I think with Stacy and Lawrence's comments is kind of what I was going to point out is that, frankly, the green is more tied to Life EMS than the checkerboard. So we've had the green, and we're on about our 7th shade, but since we started 42 years ago, the checkerboard, kind of as Brian described, that was added when the emergency service community kind of a thing, and you'll see the chevrons on the back of our ambulances in yellow in addition to the checkerboards on the side, but on the back of the Grand Rapids fire trucks, what have you, when those started to become incorporated, and we were one of the first users of all reflective stuff, that's the purpose of that. But I think if you ask anybody kind of what our main brand is, it's the green. So I'm not necessarily doing, I guess, ourselves any favor because I've got my nose off Spike's face, but anyways, but really that's the point. So I guess kind of green is what we're more known for, I think, than the checkerboard, so one or the other, I guess.
All right. Well, that's a fun discussion. Minutia. Anything else related to this? Seems like we're all amenable to the sign. Otherwise, if you love the green and that's part of your brand more so, then it sounds like staff is comfortable with you making it all green. I honestly, I don't see it as a huge problem. I understand if we're expanding the size of the sign with branding, that might be a bigger issue, but I could go either way on this. I don't really have a big problem with it considering the size of the actual changeable space. But that's just me. It sounds like a couple other people would rather stick to the ordinance, and if that means taking the yellow off, then I guess that's what it is. But I'm open to other people's interpretations.
I feel like, well, as he just admitted, that green is a part of their branding. So if we allow this, then what happens with every other sign that comes that also has this? Do we amend the ordinance, or do we just say, we're just going to waive, everybody who comes in that is not in line with the ordinance and then forget about it in the first place? So I think that's kind of where I'm at. Obviously, I'm okay with the green there, but I think the larger point is if you waive one, then you have to waive all. And so we may as well amend the rule, the ordinance, or we keep it.
So just to point out that the variance here, if you will, is, 9% versus 50%. But I appreciate the commissioner's, strict interpretation of the ordinance. And so I guess my question for the applicant would simply be if you made the overall cabinet and electronic message center slightly smaller, you could keep the green and yellow. If you dropped the 24 square foot or the 19 square foot to 8, I can't do math. But, if you made it slightly smaller, you could keep the color as identified by staff as branding. I'm trying to find a solution here since it sounds like there's some opposition within the commission to allowing the variance. Sure, yeah, I'd love to hear your creative response to that.
The sign cabinet is built around the message center. We're trying to maximize the size, as 32 square feet is not a hugely large sign for 4 lanes of traffic. The difficulty that I'm having with this adaptation of can you use the green or not, what if I change the green 3 shades of green so it's no longer Life EMS green? I don't know if anybody here is going to be able to tell except for him, because trust me, he will. But if you're Advanced Auto Parts, are you saying you can't paint your cabinet red? Are you saying if you are Burger King, you can't paint your stanchions yellow? And I understand what we're talking about, but if we're saying a color is branding, I see buildings that are Wendy's that have a red stripe painted on them. Is that considered branding? Is that considered against the size of your sign? I mean, we're opening up a whole Pandora's box here.
If the commission is looking to approve this project, the sign, I suggest that they just work with the petitioner work with the planning department to address the logo or the color scheme. That sounds great. Let's do that. Thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear, so we'd be approving as proposed, knowing that staff will work with the applicant on the finer details? Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Commissioner
Everyone else?
Roseboom, are you comfortable with that?
Okay, would somebody be willing to make a motion?
I will.
All right, thanks.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use site plan review request of Life EMS Mark Meyer to install a new ground sign with electronic message center at 1050 Fuller Avenue Northeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will permit timely and immediate messaging for activities and notices. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.8.e because the proposed sign is to meet all setback area and height requirements. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed sign will be scaled, sited, and architecturally designed in a manner consistent with the character and development within the neighborhood and the area. The proposed use will not have potentially adverse effects on the neighborhood because the proposed sign will be oriented perpendicular to Fuller Avenue and have minimum effect on residential uses across the street. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive glare or visual clutter because the electronic sign functions will operate in accordance with the regulations for electronic message centers, and the proposed sign will meet all requirements of the zoning ordinance. The building and site area required for the proposed use will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practicable, particularly where the natural features assist in preserving the general character of the neighborhood, because the installation of the proposed sign will not entail major excavation, and the landscaping at the base of the sign will meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The proposed use will safeguard the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the public because sign placement will not interfere with pedestrian travel and vehicular movement, and lighting levels will be limited under the operational requirements of the zoning ordinance. The proposed development will not place an excessive burden on services currently furnished or may be required by the city or other public agencies because there are no effects on the facilities or services of the city. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A approvals, which are on the screen, minus sub 3 and sub 4. That the proposed sign will comply with the operational requirements of section 5.15.10, changeable copy signs, including display regulations, light levels, and permitting requirements. And that the proposed sign's electronic messaging center shall be determined in cooperation with city staff in alignment with the requirements of the zoning ordinance.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Open up the public comment portion of the meeting. Anyone here today? Close public comment. Commissioners or staff, anything else? I'll just say, Sarah, thank you for doing your best to represent the ordinance well in a patient and professional manner. That was excellent.
Way to go, Sarah.
I really applaud you. Thank you. All right, we're adjourned.
Can I take a minute to explain where I'm coming from a little more thoroughly?
Sure.
I don't feel like the Planning Commission is well-equipped to handle sign design changes on the fly, which we always inevitably end up trying to do. And I don't think we're equipped to do it, which is why I think it's best left to where we landed, which was let our professional ordinance people, if we're okay with the general thing, let them apply the ordinance appropriately. And in fact, when we talked about our retreat topics for this year, I suggested that we talk about how we deal with signs. And I still think that's a topic that we could improve our process on. I think signs are something that everyone has opinions about, which is why I think it's best to be more, also more predictable for our applicants, because we don't want to waste their time either and leave it up to who knows how we'll be feeling on the particular day. We know that's always a risk for any of our cases. Mm-hmm. So that's why, the background on why my approach generally is follow the ordinance.
Yeah, thank you for the explanation. I agree. I think it needs to be predictable, and I think the issue today was not that's not a predictable issue or an easily understood, like, what's the purpose? Yeah, it's a very nuanced thing, and you have to use personal judgment in understanding or applying that portion of the ordinance, I feel like, and that's not always, you're going to have people come down on different sides of that every day. Thank you.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you. We're adjourned.